We had been together for almost 3 years. I had always believed we were happy. He was the kind of person I thought would never hurt me, someone who'd always have my back. Our relationship had grown over time, and despite the occasional small misunderstandings, we were a team, or so I thought. We'd laugh over dinner, binge-watch shows on lazy Sundays, and make plans for the future, like everyone else in love. Everything seemed so perfect, so secure. There were moments when I'd look at him and feel a deep sense of gratitude. I felt seen, cared for, and appreciated in a way that made me believe he was my forever. I trusted him. That was the foundation of it all. We built this life together, one where both of us were supposed to be happy. There were no signs that suggested otherwise. At least, not in the way I had expected. He wasn't distant or rude. He didn't suddenly start ignoring me or acting cold. Our bond seemed natural, unforced. I felt safe. But there were times when I'd feel a shift, a small moment of hesitation. The kind of hesitation that you can't put your finger on, but is there, lingering in the background. Maybe it was the late nights he started working or the way he'd turn his phone screen away from me when I walked by. Maybe it was just me being paranoid. After all, people who are in love don't cheat, right? Or at least, that's what I believed. So, I let it slide, chalked it up to nothing. I was probably overthinking things. Then one night, when I came home earlier than expected, the sense of something being off hit me harder than I ever anticipated. I walked into the living room, and I could tell something wasn't right. He was on the couch, his back to me, his phone in his hand, and he looked so nervous, like a kid caught doing something they shouldn't. The moment I entered, he quickly closed the screen, his face flushed. I froze. There it was. The gut feeling I had been suppressing for weeks was now becoming a reality. My heart dropped, but I still couldn't bring myself to say it out loud. The suspicion was gnawing at me, but I refused to believe it. Not him. Not us. I stayed quiet, observing. He didn't look at me, didn't offer any kind of explanation. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe I was imagining things. I wanted to ignore it, to convince myself it wasn't what I thought it was, but deep down I knew. This was just the beginning. The trust one had built for years was now crumbling under the weight of doubt. It was a shift I couldn't ignore, and in that moment, I knew things were about to change. I didn't want to confront him. I wasn't ready. But I couldn't stop the questions in my mind. Something was different, and I had to know why. The next few days were a blur. My mind raced, constantly replaying that moment over and over. The tension between us was unbearable. He was acting distant, but I couldn't bring myself to ask outright. It felt too raw, too real. I tried to shake off the thought that something was off, but the gnawing suspicion refused to leave. I could sense that the trust one had in him was starting to slip, and with it, a part of me was unraveling. I couldn't take the uncertainty anymore. I decided to check his phone. I knew it was a breach of trust, but I needed to know. Something in me snapped. I felt like I was suffocating under the weight of my own questions. When I found the text messages, I froze. The words on the screen made my stomach churn. They were from another woman, someone I didn't recognize, and the messages were flirtatious, intimate, and far too personal. There was no denying it. I felt a sickening wave of betrayal wash over me, and everything I thought I knew about our relationship came crashing down. I sat there in silence, staring at the screen, my hands trembling. I couldn't breathe. The person I trusted the most had betrayed me in the worst possible way. How could he do this? How could he lie to my face and make me feel like everything was fine when, all along, he was carrying on with someone else? I felt sick to my stomach, not just because of the affair, but because of the emotional devastation it left in its wake. Every sweet moment, every promise we made to each other, now seemed like a lie. I confronted him that night, unable to hold back any longer. My voice shook as I asked him about the texts. At first, he denied everything. He tried to convince me that I was mistaken, that it was just a harmless conversation. But his nervousness gave him away. His face was pale, his hands fidgeting. I could see the guilt in his eyes, and it made me feel even worse. How could he sit there and lie to me, knowing the truth was right in front of us? The conversation quickly escalated into an argument. My heart was racing, and I could feel the tears threatening to spill. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but I couldn't find the words. The pain in my chest was so overwhelming that it felt like I couldn't breathe. How had we gotten here? This wasn't the relationship I thought we had. It wasn't supposed to end like this. He admitted it then, almost reluctantly. He confessed to the affair, but his explanation felt empty. He said it was a mistake, that it didn't mean anything, but his words only made the pain worse. I wanted to scream at him, to tell him how much he had hurt me, but all I could do was sit there in silence, trying to process what was happening. Nothing he said could take away the betrayal I felt. He broke me in a way I couldn't even begin to explain. The anger started to bubble up inside me, but so did the heartbreak. I wanted to lash out, to make him feel the same pain I was feeling, but I was too broken to do anything. I just wanted to escape. I couldn't stand being in the same room with him, couldn't look at him, without feeling disgusted. My world had been shattered, and I didn't know how to put the pieces back together. I spent the rest of the night tossing and turning, my mind racing with a million thoughts. How could I trust him again? Could I ever forgive him? My heart was heavy with doubt, and I didn't know what to do next. The person I thought I knew, the person I thought I loved, was now someone I couldn't even recognize. The days after the confrontation felt like I was walking through a fog. I couldn't focus, couldn't think clearly. Everything I did felt like I was moving through thick mud, struggling to keep my head above water. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. The constant feeling of betrayal hung over me like a dark cloud that I couldn't shake. My body was physically exhausted, but no matter how tired I was, I couldn't escape the emotional toll it took on me. I felt it in every part of my being. My stomach was in knots, my chest tight, my head heavy. I couldn't stop replaying the moment he admitted the affair. His words echoed in my mind, reminding me how little he seemed to care about what he'd done. The pain wasn't just emotional, it was physical too. I couldn't walk properly without feeling the weight of the emotional burden on my body. My muscles ached, and the exhaustion wasn't just from sleepless nights, it was a deep, internal exhaustion, the kind that feels like it's coming from the inside out. I tried to distract myself. I went out with friends, hoping their company would take my mind off the situation. But even when I was surrounded by people, I felt so alone. Every conversation, every laugh, felt distant, as if I were watching life through a foggy window. I could barely focus on what anyone was saying. My mind kept drifting back to him, back to the betrayal. I couldn't stop thinking about how someone I trusted so completely had torn my world apart. How did I get here? How did I not see the signs sooner? I felt a mixture of anger and deep sorrow that I couldn't explain. The anger was easy to identify. It was the feeling of being lied to, deceived, and betrayed. But the sorrow was heavier. It wasn't just about him cheating. It was about everything that had been built on a lie. It was the memories we shared, the future I thought we were working towards, all of it now tainted. The sorrow wasn't just because of the affair, but because of the loss of trust, the loss of what I thought was real. It wasn't just about him, it was about me too. How had I let myself get to this point where I was so blind to the truth? I couldn't stop the tears. They came at random moments, and each time they felt like a small release, but they didn't make the hurt go away. I cried because I felt stupid, because I believed in him, because I didn't see it coming. I cried because I thought I knew who he was, but I didn't. The betrayal had stripped me of my confidence in myself, and that hurt more than anything else. There were moments when I was angry at myself for even considering staying with him. The thought of forgiving him, of trying to fix this, seemed impossible. But at the same time, I still loved him. Or at least I thought I did. That made everything even more complicated. How could I love someone who had hurt me so deeply? How could I continue to hold on to a relationship that had shattered into pieces right in front of me? The love I thought was there felt like a distant memory, a story I couldn't quite believe anymore. I tried to keep busy, but the reality was, every time I was alone, the weight of everything hit me harder. It was like being suffocated by the emotional aftermath. I couldn't escape it. I couldn't even move forward. I felt paralyzed. The constant questioning, the wondering if I was enough, if this was my fault, if I could ever trust anyone again. It all consumed me. I couldn't even walk without the pain reminding me of the emotional weight I was carrying. The most frustrating part was that I didn't know what to do next. I didn't know if I should walk away or if I should try to fix things. Could I ever get past this? Would he even try to make things right? Or was this just the beginning of the end? The uncertainty was overwhelming. The physical exhaustion wasn't just because of sleepless nights. It was a constant reminder of how deeply this had affected me, how much of myself I had lost in the process. I wanted to heal, but I couldn't even begin to figure out how. I reached a point where I could no longer keep pretending everything was fine. I could feel myself breaking down inside, and the decision weighed heavily on me. I couldn't ignore the reality of what had happened. The betrayal, the lies, it was all too much. The trust we built, the promises we made, were now shattered beyond repair. I couldn't go back to how things were, even if I wanted to. Something in me had changed, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't undo the damage. I spent hours reflecting on everything we had been through. The relationship had meant so much to me, and it hurt to think about letting it go. But the truth was undeniable. I couldn't live in a relationship where trust had been so thoroughly broken. I wasn't the same person I had been before all of this. The pain was too deep, and it had taken a toll on me in ways I couldn't ignore. I had to make a choice, a hard one, but one that was necessary for my own well-being. At first, I felt guilty. How could I walk away from everything we'd built together? I still cared about him, still had love for the person I thought he was, but I knew I couldn't keep living this lie. He had hurt me in the worst possible way, and no amount of apologies could change that. The thought of staying with him, trying to fix what was broken, seemed impossible. I realized that no matter how much I loved him, I couldn't compromise my self-respect, my sense of worth. He had already shown me that I wasn't enough, and that hurt more than anything else. The decision to leave was painful, but it felt necessary. I couldn't heal if I stayed in the same environment, constantly reminded of the betrayal. It wasn't just about moving on from him, it was about moving on from the version of myself I had lost. I had to reclaim my life, my peace, and my happiness. I couldn't keep holding on to a future that was no longer there, a future built on broken promises. The days following my decision were filled with confusion and emotional chaos, but a part of me felt a sense of relief. It was as if a weight had been lifted, though I knew the road ahead would be difficult. I didn't have all the answers yet, and the hurt was still fresh, but I knew I couldn't stay in a place where trust had been completely destroyed. I had to trust myself enough to walk away, to believe that I was worth more than what I had been given. I didn't look back. I couldn't. The healing process was long and painful, but I began to focus on myself. I leaned on my friends, allowed myself to grieve, and slowly started rebuilding my life. I knew I had a long way to go, but I could finally see a future that wasn't defined by his betrayal. It wasn't easy, and there were moments of doubt, but in the end, I knew I made the right decision. I was choosing me, and that was all I needed to move forward.